Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge is located off the coast of Florida, 60 miles east of Orlando. On its 140,000 acres, Merritt Island offers world-class wildlife watching, fishing, boating, and rocket launches. The multiple-use land, dense foliage, and frequent lightning storms creates a dynamic and complex firefighting environment.
I'm Rob Lee. I started my career here at Merritt Island as Assistant Refuge Manager in 1977. I was on the Ransom Road Fire as a firefighter, coming in after most of the equipment was here, and was present when we were on the radio desperately trying to find Bo and Scott. The summer of 1981 was typical in a lot of ways for this part of Florida. It was hot, it's humid, we got afternoon thunderstorms. The staff, we were doing a lot of different things, but we were also doing a lot of fighting fires. There had been several fires here this summer and specifically this week. Afternoon thunder showers are normal and expected, but the amount of lightning that we get here at Merritt Island, it's one of the highest concentrations of lightning strikes in America. And so with those afternoon storms during a drought season, and it was a drought season that year, a fire was expected, really. We were anxious to respond to them. In addition to all of our other jobs, when there was a fire, everybody changed mode, and we became firefighters then. We were busy that whole summer. We were not exhausted. We were eager to fight these fires. We weren't afraid. It was us. It was something that we had to do, and we embraced that opportunity to do that. And we had done fires before. We had an expectation of what each of us could do, and a lot of our prior experience, we did control burns on the St. John's Refuge, tall grass, marsh grasses. We did a few burns on Merritt Island, and we had a few wildfires. I do believe that we had some preliminary training, possibly introduction to firefighting, but most of our experience was what we had done already, what we had done that summer at Merritt Island. And usually it was a direct attack on these fires, and pretty much we were successful in those fires. It was kind of almost in the dark ages for the agency in firefighting, and in fact a lot of it was OJT, and it didn't really include the IRPG. This thing didn't exist until 15 years later. So what we were doing was, we were kind of winging some of it, but we felt confident, and I was there, and we all had good gear. We had Nomex clothing and everything. That day I was out on a bird survey in Indian River, and wasn't here on Ransom Road for the first fire. By the time I got here, that particular fire was out and controlled. I don't know if it was out, but it was controlled. And then we got reports of another lightning strike and another fire started. And so it was from one fire to another. When I arrived at the fire, there was already a team here. They had begun backfiring off, I believe, the north and the west boundary. And so I just was kind of assimilated into our team that was back at Ransom Road, and just sort of came there and waited for the next command, and that's when I remember that the decision was made to make a direct attack and to send the bulldozer in off of Ransom Road to start cutting a break. So Bo was operating the tractor, and Scott was in the jump seat. The jump seat was an interesting thing. We manufactured it, or not we. Our shop manager, Jim, he made it, and there were several of us that wanted to be in that jump seat for the first time that we tried it. And this was like its maiden voyage. And since I was late to the party, I didn't get that seat. And so I think about that a lot, that I wanted to be there. I know others that wanted to be there, and Scott was here, and so he was on the dozer. They took off, and it wasn't long after they left that they were gone. We couldn't see them. We kind of knew where the fire was because we could see smoke coming up. And so we were standing by. We had drip torches with the idea that maybe we're going to do a backfire here. We weren't really sure at that point what we were going to do. And there was pretty good radio communication with everybody. We were in contact with Bo on the tractor. And then all of a sudden, I learned afterward that he made a transmission that there was a different head fire coming toward us. And so we kind of became alert and aware of it, and we could see it. And then the wind started to pick up, and it was just a pretty rapid intensification. The trees really whipping around, and we could hear thunder, and then rain just started pelting us. And so we were just kind of hunkered down there for a while. And at the same time, I do remember that we weren't getting a response on the radio. I wasn't trying to work the radio, but I could hear it in the background that we lost communication. And at first, with all the chaos of the storm, we didn't think it was a tragedy at that point. And then the storm passed over, and it was an intense fire, really heavy storm, and it drenched the fire. So we never felt threatened by the fire on Ransom Road. I do remember looking behind and seeing that there was a ditch with water, and so I said, well, if I have to, I'll jump in there and hold my breath. Didn't have to do that, and there was never this fear of that the fire was going to go over Ransom Road. And I think it's just because of how intense the fire was. And then it just got eerily quiet, and then Fire Boss was just continuously trying to raise them on the radio, and it wasn't happening. It's about that time that I looked over to Alan, and he looked at me, and then we just took off. An important point in understanding this situation was the bulldozer got stumped as Scott and Bo were trying to run from the fire. And this is a good example of what it was. We call it a lighter stump. And when these slash pines die, sometimes the resins are concentrated in the trunk and in part of the root system, and they don't decay. And they're solid. They're like a rock. Normally, a bulldozer going through a stand, if they run over this with their track, they'll just break it off and keep going. But this particular situation, these things are also hidden out there in this really dense brush, and you can't see them. And just by chance, the bulldozer track went on one side of the stump, and it jammed with the frame of the bulldozer and disabled it. Once the storm passed and it was over, it was eerily quiet. For just an instant, it was like nothing was happening, but then immediately the urgency of finding the rest of our team was really important. The heavy brush and the impenetrable vegetation we were looking through prior to the storm was gone. And it was replaced with basically black earth and lots of ground smoke. And it was totally quiet. I don't remember the wind blowing or anything. And when Ellen and I made the decision to start running and find the bulldozer and find Bo and Scott, We took off, and we were able to run and zigzag through the pines. There was a medium density of relatively small pine trees, so we were running and yelling and listening for a response. And gradually, I went one direction, Alan went in another, and gradually we could barely hear each other. Kept running and zigzagging and going in the direction where we thought we would find them. And then I remember Alan yelling, I found them, and he did a radio broadcast to let everyone know. And I could hear him, and so I went toward that sound. And as I came through the smoke, and I could see Alan bent over Bo. He was giving Bo some care. Bo was on his side, and he was looking right toward me. And my instant thought was that that's Bo. He's going to be fine. And he looked like he was hurting. I could tell he was injured, but he just had that look about him that he's going to be fine. That was comforting. But then my gaze went directly to Scott, and Scott was just to my left, and he was in a sitting position, pretty much charred. His clothing was mostly melted. Smoke was still coming off of his body. His smoke was coming from his scalp. All of his hair was gone. His ears were gone, and his nose was gone, and his lips were gone, and pretty much unrecognizable. He was making a sound, and so I just started talking to him, and he was sitting with his knees bent, sitting upright, and I just told him I was there. I was going to help him. I didn't really know what to do. Wasn't trained for that kind of a situation, and so I took my canteen and I poured water over his head and made sure that it didn't run down into his face, and just kept talking to him. And there was a lot of radio chatter. We were getting help, and people had already contacted an ambulance, and we just did that. It's kind of all I can remember as far as the details there. And then we got a transmission that the ambulance is arriving, actually 2 ambulances. And so I ran back so that I could meet them and tell the medical personnel where to go. So I got back to Ransom Road, and it seems like the ambulances were there, and so they're, I suppose they were paramedics or nurses, and grabbed 2 stretchers and came back to the site, and immediately went to Bo, and we were able to move him onto the stretcher okay. And then it took 4 people to pick up and start back. So they started then that journey to zigzagging through the trees to get back to Ransom Road. And then I was still there with several other people, and I honestly can't remember who it was now. But Scott was so badly burned that his limbs weren't flexible, and so he had to remain in a sitting position, and so we were able to maneuver him onto the stretcher, and we had to carry him out in that sitting position. So we needed at least 1 or 2 extra people, I remember, to balance him out to make sure he didn't fall over. And then we headed directly to the ambulance from there, and I believe 1 ambulance was already gone, and we put him in the second one. And basically the last thing I remember is just the lights of the ambulance, and poof, he was gone. And pretty much the way I felt was like, wow, this is the end of the trail for them. But the thing I didn't realize that the effects of that tragedy were in the future, and that's what laid ahead for everybody else that was there. Whew, let's see. After the fire, we didn't spend very much time out here on site where it all ended, but there was one thing that was just really, really obvious to me and many others, was that while we found all this tragedy in this spot that's basically right in front of me. This is what we saw behind us. We saw a barely scorched green saw palmetto wall, and it was just so mind-boggling that, as intense as all that fire was and what it did to this environment and to our friends, that it stopped right here. And it was this time and space is just like, it's like a lot of tragedies. It's just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it was just mind-boggling that a whole fire was basically drenched in a matter of seconds, really. And it was like, yeah, why? Why do these live and my friends don't? It's just what happened. So the fire's out. Scott and Bo are gone, and we're all back at Ransom Road. Just sort of, it's a quiet time, looking at each other and really not knowing what to do. Turns out that what we thought was a horrible end to a horrible day was really just beginning for some of us. Some of us went home. We took the equipment back to the shop, but there was a report that one of the initial fires on the east side of this parcel was smoking and had flared up again. So the decision was made to leave 2 people behind to monitor it through the night. So that's what they did. After going through all that, then they had to spend the night out here monitoring that fire. I think that was pretty hard on them. I went home to my family and was back on site at first light and to relieve them, and they could leave, and pretty much that nothing happened with that fire. But there was, as you can imagine, in the government agency, lots of things were happening. Phones were ringing all night long. Everybody was being, the area office was called, the regional office was called, Washington, D.C., everybody was charged with doing something now. We need an investigation, we need to form a committee, and all this was going on in the background. But we were here, we're cleaning our equipment, and we're basically getting ready, because I don't know if it was the next day or the day after, but we had another fire, and we just went and took care of them.
Factors already discussed include drought, wind shifts, and training. In addition, there was a weather warning 1 hour before the accident that most firefighters did not hear. Also, because one fire shelter was left in the dozer during the chaos, Bo and Scott doubled up in a single fire shelter. Before 1981, Fish and Wildlife employees fought fire as a collateral duty only. And higher up, the types of uses for and agencies involved on Merritt Island created room for misunderstandings about fire suppression priorities. While no single factor caused this accident, each one had an impact on its outcome. These factors combined to create a tragedy that led directly to the development of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Professional Fire Program. Scott Maness served 3 years as a research zoologist for the Peace Corps. He then earned a master's degree in biology. Scott was particularly interested in reptilian and crocodilian biology and helped to expand the refuge's monitoring and inventory projects. Several of his specimen finds were firsts for the refuge. Maness also received a letter of commendation for his participation in the service's International Affairs Program for Conservation Education and his work as an interpreter for several Latin American visiting conservationists. Bo Sosline enlisted in the Air Force in 1969 and fulfilled his military obligation in 1973. After the military, he obtained several pilot certifications and became a skilled pilot. He also enjoyed fishing and sailing and was active in the Titusville Yacht Club and the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. He made significant contributions to Dusky Seaside Sparrow Management and helped implement recovery plans at St. John's and Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge.
You know, the message of what should you do when you're suffering from basically post-traumatic stress. It's a term that became really popular after the Vietnam War, and so we understand that now, and the key to that, it's almost like having an addiction. You have to realize that you're experiencing it, and then you have to reach out for help. And hopefully your family and your agency, they understand and they can provide you that help. But the onus is really on you to learn through that and to grow through that, and don't let what happened to you define the rest of your life. Find a way to work through it, get through it, and carry on.